Hello and welcome along to another Premier League preview from the Honest Football Podcast. This time we look ahead to game week 6 of the 23-24 season, and we start with a preview of Luton Town versus Wolverhampton Wanderers. A big game on Saturday at the bottom between two sides that have been unable to take chances at times this season. So it's going to be a very interesting one and quite possibly a low scoring affair as well. In addition to previewing that game, we'll have a look back at Luton's performance against Fulham and Wolves against Liverpool because I was able to watch that prior to the Fulham game. And of course, as always, we'll also have our quickfire predictions for all of this weekend's Premier League fixtures and have a recap of how we all got on last weekend too. So I hope you're looking forward to all of that. Thank you to everyone who continues to play along as always. We'll be back with championship predictions later this week too. There's a big game week starting tonight, which you can find up in the eye above. We'll have our first Championship Manager special later this week with Neil Warnock on his way from Huddersfield. But let's look ahead to Luton versus Wolves, and we start that by looking back to Fulham versus Luton, which was quite an infuriating game. Now, for the first three Luton games this season, whilst I've had moments of frustration, for example, the VAR penalty we should have had at the end of the West Ham game, and the chances that we had at times against both Chelsea and Brighton, overall, there wasn't that honest feeling that we probably should have won the game. This one, there really is. Now, we go back to the start of it. It was probably a surprise that begun the day, which is, for the first time I can remember in a league fixture under Rob Edwards, from the start, we went with a different formation, which was the same setup of a back five, but almost a sort of Antonio Conte system with a 2/4 in midfield. So instead of going with three in midfield and a front two, we had two wide players and just the one up front, which meant we could support Fulham's main threat, which was out wide, and the wing-backs got extra support there. But it also meant that they could support the attack and give us three on the counter, which you have to argue at times worked for us. The match stats show you exactly how it panned out. Fulham absolutely dominated the ball, but for large portions of the game, without having any threat whatsoever. Luton were not interested in pressing in the Fulham half. They sat on the halfway line. Carlton Morris was in there. It looked like he was walking around a lot, but actually, he was just there to stop the passes from the centre-half into Paulinho, which is one of Fulham's greatest threats. Of course, he stayed and signed a new deal when he could well have been at Bayern Munich by now. So that side of the tactical game plan worked really well because for the first time this season, Luton weren't really carved open at all. There were a couple of chances late on where Fulham got in behind. Of course, we were chasing the game and went 4-4-2. And there was the one for the goal, obviously. But aside from that, Luton weren't carved open with regularity, which is a huge sign of progress. I would argue we didn't have as much of a consistent attacking threat, and the numbers would suggest we didn't get in the attacking third as often. However, the chances we did have at times were glorious. And the fact that we lost this game 1-0 is a real frustration to me because, yes, Fulham had most of the ball. We gave them a gift of a goal, though, and they didn't really look like scoring at any other point, which is the biggest frustration of it all. On the flip side of that, Luton crashed the woodwork with Jacob Brown's header. They had an absolutely glorious chance early in the second half with Amari Bell. Probably should have had a penalty with VAR, albeit there can be an argument as to whether it's a clear and obvious error, but balance of probabilities, it's probably a pen. But most importantly, if you look at what did happen, Luton had the best chances in the game, and that's the first time we can say that honestly this season. If you go to the Opta clear-cut stats, it's 3-1 in favour of Luton. The expected goals is virtually identical. And Luton should have got something out of the game, which makes it more frustrating. I think we are getting towards a point where we're going to end up having a conversation about the goalkeepers soon. I wonder if maybe that will change naturally after the League Cup tie next week, as Luton go away to Exeter. But for the second game in a row, Kaminski's had a bit of a howler, unfortunately. And it's a shame because he has otherwise been decent, but I wonder if Rob Edwards will go for the security and safety of the experienced Tim Krul next time out. Not that he looked great in the last League Cup tie. Generally, though, a much better shape for Luton. Some players for the first time putting in what looked an established Premier League performance. Great to have Tom Lockyer back in the middle of the three. Mads Anderson moved to the left of a three, and with the pace of Amari Bell alongside him, and the support of a winger defensively, really did look assured for the first time this season. A little worrying on the other side that Reece Burke hobbled off towards the end, but hopefully more just a cramp or a bit of fatigue rather than any injury. And Carlton Morris maybe didn't quite look himself, but had a slight different job to do as well. The big question for me at home and in a game that we maybe have to win if we want to stay up this season and against Rob Edwards' former club that he knows so well, will we go back to the two up front? Because at home, that did look more of a threat, but of course it does open us up on the break. Now, I would argue that Wolves aren't as much of a threat from wide areas. We saw in a Liverpool game for them, a lot of their threat is carried centrally. They've got that midfield three now, which is almost very similar to Luton's. Bellegarde looking brilliant in the first half against Liverpool, but they fatigued and dropped off in the second period too. The similar problem for them is in that first half, they could and should have been a minimum of two up, but arguably three or four as well. And they just don't take chances. Both sides are missing a real Premier League goal scorer. And ultimately, that's why both sides are going to be in this battle of 5 or 6 teams at the bottom this year. I don't think anyone from either side is probably going to deny that. And I think we both know the reasons that we're going to be there. But ultimately, both have got good managers who are trying to find solutions at the minute. Liverpool really struggled to cope with Wolves in the first half, and Fulham really struggled to cope with Luton's counter-attack. So both sides are making inroads. It just comes down to which team's going to take chances. Reece Burke is a big question mark for me because if he's not fit, that does take a lot out of our back three. But maybe he'll go for the more aggressive option now with a wing-back and Amari Bell slotting back in. Great to see Sambi Lokonga for the first time, who looked really composed, really solid in that midfield alongside Nakamba. How will that balance look with a three? Will it be the two of them and maybe Chong or Barkley, who may not be fit again for this weekend? But I think that might be a mainstay now to make that defence a bit more solid to counter-attacks. But overall, really promising signs from Luton. Those who came in did well. Those who stayed in looked improved again. And it is just a question of the two boxes now. Can Luton find a scoring touch, and can they deal with set pieces defensively? Because for Wolves' lack of quality in the final third at times, Craig Dawson is going to be a threat from set pieces. Fulham's best chance other than the goal was a free header from a corner. We saw what happened with Kurt Zuma against West Ham. It is a bit of a worry for me, and Craig Dawson probably one of the best in the Premier League in that scenario, albeit he missed one at the weekend. So that's something I'm a little bit worried about as well, as I mentioned to Charlie prior to the West Ham game. If you have a look at Wolves' performance though, it is going to come down to that battle of possession again. Wolves generally have hit on the counter at speed and have tried to press when teams get into their half, and Luton will try and do the same. So I would imagine that Luton will lose the battle of possession. They're not going to try and dominate the game. I think we will see two up front again and maybe a slightly more direct approach. I'll be interested if you're a Luton fan to get your thoughts on that. And for Wolves, what your thought was at the weekend, because that first half you were absolutely brilliant. And it does just appear to be the same issue of not being able to put the ball in. In terms of a prediction for this game, it's a little tricky to call. There is part of me that thinks this will not have more than one goal in it, and surely it's just going to go 1-0 either way. Maybe a 0-0 is a safe bet as well. However, I'm going to be ambitious. I'm going to predict the score that it probably should have been correct last weekend and go for another 1-1. I do feel that if Luton are going to get off the mark, it has got to be one of these games. With Everton away next week and how they're looking as well, very similar problem for their side. I just feel it has to be now. So Luton Town v Wolves, I'm going for 1-1. I'd be surprised if Wolves isn't maybe a header from a corner, a Craig Dawson one, wouldn't shock me at all. And for Luton Town, can they make the most of those chances from open play? Because the last two games, they're creating some good ones. That is my prediction for Luton Town versus Wolves then. But let's move on to the rest of the weekend's action. And we start by having a quick recap of what we all predicted for matchday 5. Now, it was a pretty good story for me on Saturday. Only one game I didn't get the correct outcome. That was Fulham Luton, which as we've discussed, Luton probably should have scored and made that correct. However, Sunday and Monday did not go so well for me, and Arsenal finally ended the Everton curse. That means I was limited to 8 points overall. A pretty decent score, but a couple of you guys in the comments were able to do as well and better. So Luke, you managed to pick up 8 as well. A perfect score for the Villa game for you, much like me, and almost got it on Monday night. But that disallowed Burnley goal for VAR cost you the matchday win. W&G fan got 9. He did predict Fulham 4, Luton 0, so you're not in my good books at the minute. And the other person who beat me, another one of the regulars, Chris Welch, you picked up 9 as well. Perfect score for you on Brighton, a 3-1 win away at Old Trafford. So well done to all of you guys for beating me. Play along in the comments as always. But you want to see what I've gone for this weekend, don't you? These are my predictions for matchday 6. No early kickoff this week due to the 7:45 on Saturday. 5 of the fixtures are on Sunday as well due to the Champions League and Europa League. And I've tried to factor in the hangover from European football into this, but in truth, we don't know how that's going to play out, particularly with the Europa sides and what teams they're going to field. But for Crystal Palace Fulham, I've gone for a 2-1 Palace win. I wasn't mightily impressed with Fulham last weekend, and Palace have played some pretty good stuff at times this year. Luton Wolves, we know I've gone for 1-1. City Forest, I've gone for 3-0. I thought Forest were poor on Monday, but they set up more defensively away from home. And City, of course, while they've got a winnable midweek game, a few injuries and will rotate a little. Brentford, I've gone for a comfortable 2-0 win at home to Everton. I feel like they're in good form at the minute. They're the better side of the two. Burnley against Manchester United, I have gone for United and Ten Hag to get a win away from home, which is a bold move and a narrow one by 2-1. I just feel Burnley will be the more aggressive, and it probably suits United not being as strong as they are normally. They'll be able to sit a bit more and counter-attack, almost play as they did under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. For Arsenal versus Spurs, the North London derby is always a thriller at the Emirates, so I'm going 3-2 to the host, but Ange's side could well be a threat this year. Brighton v Bournemouth, I've gone 3-1 to the host. Brighton playing in Europe on Thursday night, but it's a home game. AEK-Athens probably the most winnable of their group, and I feel as a result they might be able to rotate a bit and maybe keep their strongest side for Bournemouth. Chelsea versus Villa, this is controversial. I'm going for a narrow 2-1 Chelsea win. The reason for that, Villa, a tough game away in Poland on Thursday. We know Unai Emery loves the European competitions, and I just feel that that's going to have a slight hangover effect on Sunday. Liverpool and West Ham are both in the Europa, so that cancels each other out. A 3-2 win for Liverpool in another thrilling game. And Sheffield United v Newcastle to finish. I know they've got 5 days off after, but Newcastle are playing at the San Siro tonight as this episode comes out. And I'm pretty sure as a result of that, there's going to be a bit of a hangover effect. We often see it with new sides in Europe, so I've gone for a 1-1 draw. Sheffield United, they look pretty decent at times at Spurs as well. So those are my predictions for matchday 6 in the Premier League. Of course, recorded before the Champions League and Europa League fixtures, so you have to forgive me for any big changes or injuries or whatever from them. But let me know in the comments what your score predictions are, whether you agree or disagree with mine. And of course, give me your predictions for matchday 6 too. If you beat me or match my score, you'll get a shout out in the next recap, which will be looking ahead to Everton Luton next Saturday. Very frustratingly, the first game of the season I'm going to miss due to train strikes and it being impossible to get back, and work on Sunday morning, which stops us. But either way, hopefully Luton will go into it with a point or more. Let's see how many of your predictions in the comments agree with that. A massive thank you for watching as always. Your support is greatly appreciated. Championship predictions for this midweek's action are in the eye above now. Same for League One with the shorts as well. And of course, there'll be plenty more to come later in the week. I'm at Boreham Wood Rochdale tonight. You'll see clips from that. But if you enjoyed this one, please do put a thumbs up on the video. If you want to stay up to date with everything and make sure you don't miss a thing, subscribe and turn that notification bell on. I'll see you back here in a couple of days for championship predictions for the weekend. And of course, we'll be back same time next week with more look aheads for the Premier League.